It is hidden quite well, but there is a lot of symbolism surrounding Christ's death and resurrection. In fact, just now I noticed that the guy on the left is wearing all red, and the guy on the right is wearing all white. That's pretty interesting. You'll notice that corresponds to the color of the moon and the color of the sun. The sun, of course, being red and the moon being white. And those of you who have studied alchemy may want to pay attention to that, because it's no accident. Now, there's a lot of other symbolism here. You have Christ with 33 years, and he died at Golgotha. He chose to die on a cross. And I say he chose because Christ came to earth to die. His death wasn't an accident, and he orchestrated all of the events surrounding his death purposefully. And yes, he chose to die on the cross. If he wanted to die some other way, he would have. He has a crown of thorns on. The sun and the moon are supposedly coming together for an eclipse. Now, the New Testament says there's a darkness over the land, but it's generally accepted that an eclipse occurred, and that's what caused the darkness. There's 3 days and 3 nights in the tomb, and there's 3 men right here on the 3 crosses. After his resurrection, he floated into the sky. And then you have John 3:14, which says, as Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, so must the Son of Man be lifted up. And that's just a little bit of the symbolism. Each one of those elements, very symbolic, and I'm going to go into detail now. There's a lot of different beliefs and theories about Christ. You know, you have Christianity, Catholicism, LDS, even Islam believes that Jesus was a prophet, and Rastafari. There is astrotheology. And so with all these different beliefs, Christ Jesus can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people and can speak to people in different ways. So this is just some symbolism that I have found, and I'm not here to intrude upon your beliefs, just to say that this is what I found. And for me, it's beyond coincidental. And all of these elements, 33, Golgotha, the crown, the eclipse, 3 days, 3 nights, floating into the sky, all this stuff is beyond the realm of coincidence or accident, and it just all accidentally happened this way. The Son of God would be far too wise for this accident or all these coincidences to occur surrounding his death and resurrection. So that being said, I'm going to get right into it. And the first one that I'm going to start with, I think, is the 33 years. Now, turning to the New Testament for evidence of his age being 33 at death, we can see that in Luke 3:23, Jesus began his ministry at 30 years of age, and there are 3 recorded Passovers before his death on the 3rd one. The first Passover occurred in John 2:23, the second one in John 6:4, and the third is recorded in John 11:55, 12:1, 13:1, and so on. The third Passover was the one that occurred the night before Jesus died, and it's the one that was recorded by all 4 gospel writers in conjunction with the Last Supper and the death of Jesus. So, that being said, Jesus must have died at the age of 33, and presumably that is the year 33 AD. Now, not getting into any of the Masonic symbolism of 33, what I am interested in is the spine. And of course, the spine has 33 vertebrae. And this is the symbolism of Christ's 33 years. And there is the elevating up the spine. So it would be the same as basically elevation in years from 0 to 33. The same happens from the spine, where you go from the first vertebrae up to the 33rd. And at the 33rd vertebrae, a death occurs. Just like with Christ at his 33rd year of life, a death occurred. Now, the spine is broken up into 5 different sections. There's the coccyx, the sacrum, the lumbar, the thoracic, and the cervical. And it's interesting that with the yoga chakras, they also correspond to these 5 different sections of spine. Here are the 7 chakras. The first 5 are located within the spine. The 6th is the pineal gland, or the mind's eye. And the 7th is actually outside of the body. It's above the body. And the 7th chakra represents essentially an out-of-body experience. So there are 6 chakras inside the body. One of them is inside of Golgotha, and 5 of them are along the spine. So I'm going to just change the color of the first 5 here and bring the spine back so that we can see the corresponding chakras to the section of spine. This is called the Muladhara chakra, or the root chakra, and that corresponds, of course, with this 4 fused vertebrae at the very bottom. And then there is the sacral chakra. Of course, that's the sacrum, which is 5 fused vertebrae here. The solar plexus chakra to the lumbar. And we have the heart chakra to the thoracic region of the spine, and the throat chakra, of course, for the cervical. On top of that, of course, you've got the skull, or Golgotha, and that is where the 6th chakra resides, with the pineal gland at the center of the brain. Now, as you can see, it's not easy to get the 33 years from the New Testament, but they're actually in there, and we do know that Christ died at 33 years old. And that is the symbolic meaning here of the 33 years of Christ. He chose to live for 33 years purposely, and those 33 years correspond to the 33 vertebrae of the spine. And as I hinted to previously, once you have elevated it up the 33 vertebrae, of course, you finally reach the 6th chakra, which is located in Golgotha. Matthew 27:33. Interesting that Matthew has Golgotha right after 33, just like Christ did. But they came to a place called Golgotha, which means the place of the skull. So Christ chose for his location of death to be the skull. Now, that is right on top of the 33. Of course, these 33 vertebrae of the spine support the skull, or Golgotha. So not only did Christ choose to live for 33 years, exactly corresponding to the number of vertebrae in the spine, he also chose to die at Golgotha. In Hatha, or Kundalini Yoga, the power that starts at the root chakra and goes all the way up through the 7th is called Kundalini. So Hatha and Kundalini yoga are really quite similar and said to be synonymous. But Kundalini is laying dormant in 3.5 coils at the bottom of the spine. Now I am using Gaddson's Kundalini snake here, so I've covered that flag in a different video, but the 3.5 coils with the 33 sections are quite obviously representing the spine, and the 1, 2, 3 loops are undeniable. But 3.5 times looped, we have Kundalini here at the base of the spine, which is lying dormant. Now this is coming from kind of a mix of different historical texts, paintings, and scrolls and all that. Some of it is from yoga, some of it's from Hinduism. Really what it comes down to is the Vedas, and the Vedas include the Upanishads. And these historical religious texts predate Christ. So Christ going to all these different temples and studying religious texts would have likely had access to the Vedas and the Upanishads, and that's reflected by the words that Christ used. But when I speak of these concepts here, like Kundalini, these are from texts which predate Christ and that he was likely acquainted with. So when you turn to John 3:14, it says, as Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, even so the Son of Man must be lifted up. The serpent being lifted up is Kundalini going up the 33 vertebrae until it reaches Golgotha. Now, that occurs at death. And when people talk about they're going towards a great light, or they're, of course, leaving their body at death, what is happening as you're approaching that great light is that Kundalini, which I'm not going to say is your spirit or soul, but from my best understanding, it aligns synonymously with the Holy Spirit. But whether you like it or not, you are going to raise the serpent, and in most cases it only happens at death. And when you die, this Kundalini or Holy Spirit will go up the spine and out of the body, and the body will be dead. Now, what yoga teaches is to raise the Kundalini up 33 into Golgotha, and sometimes, like with the case of Lazarus, I've covered that in a previous video, Kundalini essentially could be raised to the 7th chakra and then brought back into the body and finally lowered down to the spine, back to its resting spot where the human returns to normal. Now, the reason this is called a death and a rebirth, I'm going to cover shortly, but for one, death is when Kundalini leaves the body, and only through essentially some of these Hatha yoga practices can it be elevated up into the skull, kept there for some period of time, and then brought back down. So when John 3:14 speaks of raising the serpent and that the Son of Man must do this just like Moses did, obviously with Neshutan. That is the serpent being spoken of in John 3:14 is Kundalini, which lays dormant at the base of the spine in 3.5 coils. Next, I'm going to cover the cross. There is the cross. Let me turn on the 7 chakras, and you can see where the shape of the cross comes from. Now, this isn't going to make a lot of sense without Ida and Pingala, so I'm going to turn on Ida, which is moon, and Pingala, which is sun. And for the moment, I'll toggle off the 7 chakras. But what happens here is Ida, which is white, or the moon, and Pingala, which is red, or the sun, crisscross supposedly at each chakra. And these are called milk and honey. Now, where they combine is up here at the 6th chakra. And you're going to notice something interesting here. The chakras going up have lotus petals, lotus flower petals. So 4 at the root, and then we've got 6 here, going up in number each time as you go up the 33 vertebrae of the spine. But something interesting happens at the 6th chakra. We're down to 2 lotus flower petals. Now, I've studied in the Veda and Upanishads and yogic text the answer as to why there are 2 lotus flowers here, and that they both are on the right and the left side, pointing outwards. These are the 2 ventricles that go into the pineal gland. The 6th chakra, of course, being the pineal gland. So, turning on the Ida and Pingala, milk and honey raise up and crisscross each other until they both enter in and drip into the pineal gland. And where they combine, that is the land of milk and honey. That's what yoga calls samadhi. But it's very clear in the ancient texts that the 6th chakra is a 2-petal lotus flower, the 2 petals going to the left and to the right, and representing the horizontal inputs of the Pingala and the Ida into the pineal gland. Now, from my best understanding, this is the historical meaning of the cross. And it lines up perfectly with the 7th chakra being above that. And so we have that, of course, portion above the cross, the Ida and the Pingala entering horizontally here. And the reason that each chakra exists here, or there's a spiritual experience at each chakra, is because the milk and honey is not combining, but the 2 tubes that are going up, they get so close to each other here that you have a profound spiritual experience. And that's, of course, each chakra. So when the milk and honey are just very close to each other inside of the body, you have a profound spiritual experience, each one getting stronger and stronger until finally they both pour into the pineal gland and mix together into the land of milk and honey, or what's called heaven, or samadhi. So that is the symbol of the cross. Is the vertical section is the spine, at least up until here. And then the horizontal section represents the left and the right horizontal lotus petals of the Ida and the Pingala entering in. And of course, the upper portion of the cross is not of the spine, but it's above and out of body. Now, when you look at historical descriptions of Ida and Pingala, something is always the same. The sun is on the left and the moon is on the right. So here we got the sun on the left, the moon on the right. Sometimes it's swapped, but overall, this is how it's depicted. So sun on the left, moon on the right. Which wasn't the case here, well, except for the sun is on the left and the moon is on the right. But let's take a look at historical paintings of Christ. Here we have Christ, sun on the left, moon on the right. Quite similar to this. And one thing to pay attention to is the moon deity. The moon is not always, but a lot of times it's facing upwards. So typically Shiva is depicted with that same exact moon. Here's Shiva with the, you can see Shiva's moon. And actually the largest bust in the world, the Adiyogi Shiva statue, has the that same moon shape. Of course, it's on the right side, just like it is here. But anyway, it's just interesting to pay attention to that crescent moon shape. Let's keep looking at some more. Here we go, Christ. Sun on the left, moon on the right, crescent. Here we go. Sun, moon. Now this one isn't necessarily depicting Christ, but we have the cross, sun and moon. I think this one was covered on Ancient Aliens, and they said it's like spaceships or something like that. That's clear air. You can see right here it says Sol and Luna, and that these things coming down are rays of light. And this is the sun, this is the moon. If Ancient Aliens isn't smart enough to figure out that that this on the left and this on the right isn't the sun and the moon, I don't know what to tell you about their research team, but when you find Christ, you're going to find sun on the left, moon on the right. Here's another one. Sun on the left, moon on the right. Now, when those two combine in Golgotha, that's when you enter into the land of milk and honey. So I'm not going to explain too much about the eclipse here. The eclipse, the sun and the moon coming together, is exactly what happens when you go elevate up the 33 into Golgotha, and Pingala and Ida both combine in the pineal gland. You know that this is the sun and the moon combining. In fact, Hatha Yoga literally means sun and moon coming together. Hatha, the word Hatha is the combination of sun and moon. So this word itself is kind of an eclipse because it's Ha or sun and Tha, and it's just moon combined into one. So sun moon yoga is what that means. Ha, the first syllable of the word Hatha, which is composed of the syllables Ha, meaning the sun, and Tha, meaning the moon. The object of Hatha yoga is to balance the flow of solar and lunar energy in the human system. And ultimately, the goal of Hatha Yoga is to combine the Ha and the Tha in pineal. So these two combining, of course, create the eclipse. And going back to some historical depictions, we find that this is symbolized again and again here as far back in history as we go. Christ on the cross with the Ha and the Tha, or the Ida and the Pingala. So, of this collection of 10 or 11 paintings, this is the only one that has the moon on the left and the sun on the right. However, that's swapped down here where this guy in red is the sun on the left and the white with the moon on the right. So I can argue that even this one has it correct with the Ha and the Tha. But we can see an obvious match between this human with the Ha and the Tha, or the sun and the moon on the left, and yoga is showing the same exact thing. We have a match as far as this goes when it comes to symbolism between Christ's death and yoga principles. So that covers the cross, and now we've covered the eclipse, the sun and the moon combining in Pingala. According to the Apocalypse of Great Power, which is from the Nag Hammadi, the sun eclipsed, all was darkness. Now, it's starting to add up to the point where I'm saying that this goes beyond the point of coincidence that Christ chose to die on a cross during an eclipse at 33 at Golgotha, where he experienced the death and a rebirth and floated into the sky. Now, the texts say that it's very hard for the yogi in meditation to keep Kundalini in Golgotha. And that normally it only stays there for a very short period of time in meditation, and then it descends back down and coils back up into 3.5 and basically goes back to sleep. Kundalini does not at first stay long in the pineal gland, or the third eye chakra. The length of the stay depends on the strength of the yogi's practice. The natural tendency is for Kundalini to return down to the root chakra. The yogi will use all the effort at his disposal to retain her above. For the longer this is done, the nearer approach is made to the time when she can be in a permanent manner retained there. So it says, it's hard to keep Kundalini in that third eye chakra in the land of milk and honey, but a good yogi or a hard practice yogi could keep her there for a long time, or perhaps in a permanent manner retained there. And it says here, on one great power, or siddhi, is had by the man who can keep Kundalini in the pineal gland for 3 days and 3 nights. So here is one reference to the 3 days and the 3 nights, and that the purpose of Hatha Yoga is to raise Kundalini up 33 into Golgotha, where the sun and the moon eclipse or combine together in the pineal gland, and generally it tries to slip back down to its resting place, but the accomplished yogi will keep it here for 3 days and 3 nights. The next one here is floating into the sky. This is so common that it has its own Wikipedia page. It's called the Ascension of Jesus. I can't talk right. This is so common that it has its own Wikipedia page. It's called The Ascension of Jesus. And there's all kinds of biblical accounts. Various episodes refer to the ascension without specific details, but they all say the same thing. They all basically say that after his resurrection, the disciples seen him, and then he floated up into the clouds, essentially floated into the sky. So when you have raised Ida and Pingala up 33 into Golgotha, that's when you ascend from the 6th to the 7th chakra. And the 7th chakra is not in the skull, it's above the skull. And again, this 7th chakra or samadhi would have been the state that Lazarus was in. He was not, he was no longer in his body, he had left his body. And every time you find accounts of this, it's the same, that the yogi floats into the sky. And it's not that he's physically floating into the sky, but your consciousness it floats into the sky. So normally you see your consciousness through your two eyeballs, and it's stuck in the skull. And in meditation, that goes away because your eyes are generally closed, and when you do this, you essentially go out of body. Maybe what they would call astral projecting, and that feeling is always a feeling of floating into the sky.